Since The Nightmare Before Christmas was released in 1993, Tim Burton's aesthetic, Henry Selick's directing, and Danny Elfman's music have made this holiday film as much a staple as The Grinch, or say, one of those 6-hour videos of a log on fire. However, comparatively little has been said about Caroline Thompson's nuanced screenplay, which hides who may be the film's most engaging character in plain sight. Sally. At first, you might mistake Sally as one of those inconsequential filler characters that don't get to do anything cool for the duration of the movie. Yet to say she has no effect on the overall story implies that her own story isn't worth telling. Sally tries like hell to do stuff throughout the whole film, but every bumpkin and clown in this pumpkin-ass town blocks her path to success. Sally is actually the tragic protagonist of a much wider social commentary in the film. The Nightmare Before Christmas is the story of one woman's solo attempt to pursue happiness in the face of overwhelming social opposition. And the fact we don't view Sally as important as we do Jack might actually be Caroline Thompson's warning to us all. Here in Halloween Town, Sally's obstacles take on many forms, but let's start with the most obvious, the unmistakably horrible Dr. Finkelstein. Sally's creator is a creepy old man for whom, regarding Sally, the lines between mother, daughter, wife, and maid seem to be blurred into one disturbing role. He's incredibly possessive, he constantly talks down to Sally and punishes her like an insolent child. Sally's free will annoys him. When Sally tries to express herself, Finkelstein attempts to reinforce the untrue notion that she's
not ready for so much excitement,
and that her so-called restlessness is just a phase.
It's a phase, my dear. It'll pass.
He uses guilt to remind her that, as her creator, she owes him everything.
You're mine, you know. I made you.
Sally has to resort to physically giving up parts of her own anatomy just to get a taste of freedom from this creeper. He doesn't even allow her agency over her own body. Dr. Finkelstein designed this woman not to be a whole person, but as a collection of feminine body parts. Sally is quite literally a ragdoll for Finkelstein to play with. The evil doctor wears this abusive role proudly in public without fear. Because his scientific achievement earns him the respect of everyone in town, including all-star quarterback Jack Skellington, this abuse goes unchecked. The whole town is complicit in it.
But we're not mean in our town of Halloween.
Yet in spite of all this, Sally maintains her composure. She keeps finding new creative opportunities to neutralize her creator's oppression. She is never fully broken, but naturally, she still longs for liberation from this life. At this point, it's pretty clear to every viewer, young and old alike, Dr. Finkelstein sucks. But there's a far sneakier element in Halloween Town that will soon be the cause of all of Sally's troubles. The much more passive aggression of Jack Skellington. Jack is a man whose opinion has never been questioned. He's universally loved, constantly the center of attention, and praised by everyone. The town simply can't function without the approval of this leading man cultural figurehead.
Jack, please, I'm only an elected official here. I can't make decisions by myself.
The people of Halloween have bought wholesale into their institution and firmly believe that Jack Skellington,
The Pumpkin King,
can do no wrong. Because of this, Jack has been brainwashed into thinking he's infallible.
I excel without ever even trying.
Jack may not actually be such a bad guy. In fact, he can come off as quite likable. I mean, Sally likes him. It's just hard not to have that inflated sense of self-worth he has if the whole world is saying you fart pumpkin spice. However, being the coolest, most popularist guy has its downside. Perhaps Jack's wave of ennui is brought on because deep down he senses that this fame and praise that come year after year are unearned. Something's missing in his life that he can't quite place his bony finger on. Sally is moved by this sadder side of Jack. She too wishes for a better life. Granted, her desires are more immediate and tangible, like,
I'm missing my right arm right now because some pervert has it.
But even when Jack is singing his Halloween Isn't What It Used to Be song, she can see the parallels in her life.
Jack, I know how you feel.
In a sense, the institution of Halloween Town is affecting both of them negatively, and it's this connection that sets Sally's story in motion. Sally runs away from home to pursue Jack and achieve true freedom. To be clear, it doesn't seem like Sally is looking for Jack to solve her problems for her. She pursues him as an interest, as an equal, someone with similar life goals. Unfortunately, at this point, Sally doesn't fully grasp the kind of thick skull she's up against. Meanwhile, in the A-plot, Jack happens upon the brand new concept of Christmas, and like a sophomore backpacking through Amsterdam, he's intoxicated by the novelty of the new culture. However, at the same time, it perplexes him. Even after studying the holiday extensively, he still can't seem to understand how to reproduce that special feeling that Christmas has. Poor Jack is so unfamiliar with the concept of failure that he assumes if he can't understand Christmas, then it's Christmas that must somehow be flawed. And who better to fix it up than the Pumpkin King himself?
I am the
the Pumpkin King!
He decides to make Christmas all about his own vision and invites a town of devoted taxpayers along for the ride. Sally, on the other hand, is the first and only person to see that Jack spearheading this new Christmas initiative is a really bad idea. Sally cares deeply for Jack, likely more than anyone else in the town. Yet she is still the only one who realizes that he, like anyone else, has flaws. While the other townspeople line up around the block to help Jack's project, Sally risks getting caught by Finkelstein just to try to shut the whole thing down. But when she attempts to warn Jack about the impending catastrophe, he dismisses her, assuming she doesn't understand his vision. When she says,
It's going to be a disaster.
Jack naturally assumes she's referring to her own insecurities as opposed to his ideas. He's not just ignoring her, he doesn't even know what criticism is supposed to sound like. Jack then ushers her away to sew him a Santa suit, giving no weight to the gravity of her tone. As loyal Sally gets to work on a Santa costume that she knows is a bad idea, Jack's hopes, dreams, and fantasy are brought to life. At this point, his skull is so far up his own pelvic inlet, he has no inkling that anything could be going wrong. The fervor has spread to the whole town and back to him in a positive feedback loop. Jack even meets Santa, the definitive expert on Christmas, and instead of asking Santa for advice or the true meaning of the holiday, Jack treats the man like he should be honored to be in the presence of the Pumpkin King.
The Pumpkin King!
He then sends Santa away with the henchman of a notorious gangster, Oogie Boogie, without considering the consequences. It'll be fine, don't worry about it. Seeing things going from bad to worse, Sally is forced to resort to light sabotage just to see that no harm comes to her friend or the town. She goes back to the lab and risks recapture by her cruel master, again, to get a fog potion. If Jack won't listen to her, maybe he's not so arrogant as to defy the will of nature. With this solution, she wouldn't even have to hurt his ego. After all, it's not his fault if it's foggy. On the night he takes off, Jack receives more accolades, which he gladly accepts until Sally's fog rolls in. Jack actually takes this fog very personally, as if the universe is conspiring to crush his vision. But Jack's delusions are too strong, and he finds a way through the fog. Zero, as if ordained by divine intervention, gives Jack a way to take off, and sadly, Sally isn't able to get through to him. When Jack flies into the night sky and things are finally out of Sally's purview, only then does she accept defeat. With the entire town dazzled by Jack's legally distinct rendition of a Christmas song not yet in public domain, she begins to hope against her own correct judgment.
Oh, how I hope my premonition is wrong.
She puts her faith in the delusional person in charge because, with no support from anyone, what else can one person do in this situation? Now that there's no way to get through to Jack, Sally gives up hope of ever being with him. She can't be with someone who doesn't listen to anything she says.
I am not the one.
This ordeal is a lot deeper than simply getting over a crush. Jack was the only person in this heinous town who had the possibility of listening to her. They both dreamed of a better life, and Jack went ahead and deluded himself into thinking he achieved it, leaving Sally behind. Moments later, when the rebels are planning the attack on the Moments later, Sally finds Jack in mortal danger as he's targeted by the military. When everyone is distracted in their enthusiastic cloud, it's only Sally who does anything to try to help this poor sweet numbskull. Even though she's given up on Jack, even though she's given up on the town, she knows that if she doesn't step up now, Jack could die. And not in the cool, spooky Halloween way, but like actually dead. She needs to find Santa to save Jack from himself. She has to use the freedom she took at the expense of her own safety. She has to overcome her shyness and face the most intimidating man in town. Yes, this time I'm referring to Oogie Boogie. In Oogie's tastefully appointed man cave, Sally does the work of 3 people, untying Santa's rope with her hands and lowering the ladder with her arms, all while using her leg to distract the horny hemp sack. However, she is ultimately captured by him and punished for being such a tease. Sally, facing certain doom, then puts her faith in the authority of Jack. What else can she do? Sally has been slapped down over and over for standing up for herself, and now she's going to die protecting someone who doesn't even entertain her legitimate concerns. Jack got her into this mess, he damn well better get her out. Meanwhile, when the military prepares to roast Jack's chestnuts as they open fire, he assumes they're celebrating him for doing such a great job. He's sure he's nailed this Christmas thing to the point where he's bested Santa Claus. Well, of course he did, he's the Pumpkin King.
I am the Pumpkin King!
Finally, a dose of reality hits him when his sled is shot down. Although at first it seems Jack has learned a valuable lesson from all this, in reality, Jack has learned nothing. He's become an international terrorist, kidnapped multiple holiday icons, and put the safety of countless families at risk. But after a brief moping session, he lets himself off the hook. He laughs it off, chalking the whole thing up to a mere whoopsie. In this self-congratulatory song, he even manages to throw the townspeople under the bus, as well as blame fate itself for his misfortune, rather than accept one failure in his life.
Why does nothing ever turn out like it should?
He even convinces himself that this PTSD-inducing horror night would give the kids some great stories that they would totally not repress into adulthood. He gave it his best shot, but it just wasn't for him. And now it's time for him to go back to being the best guy ever. He reverts right back to where he was at the beginning.
I am the Pumpkin King!
He just cannot accept responsibility. Once he's patted himself firmly on the back for such an excellent night, it's only then when Jack finally has the same realization that Sally had weeks ago.
Uh-oh. I hope there's still time to set things right.
He does this with absolutely no mention that Sally told him this was a bad idea from the start.
What a cool original idea I came up with on my own!
When Jack arrives to save Sally and Santa, he gives Oogie's thread one hearty yoink, and that evil talking pillowcase completely falls apart. You know, Oogie Boogie talks a big game, but this loser can't even handle getting his body ripped apart one time. In the end, Jack apologizes to Sally. Oh, sorry, I misread that. Jack apologizes to Santa. He doesn't need to apologize to Sally because in his mind, he hasn't done anything wrong to her. At this point, Jack probably hasn't even connected the dots between Sally's warnings and the Christmas Eve catastrophe.
Jack, you oblivious twit!
Jack notices Sally only after Santa, long-established winter holiday dad, tells him to listen to her. Jack only notices Sally had an opinion on anything after she put her entire life on the line to save Jack from himself. Sally's ending is somewhat bittersweet. Yes, Sally does get her long-sought-after freedom. With Sally's persistent opposition to him, Dr. Finkelstein gives up on her and creates a new bride, one with half his own brain, implying he would rather build a new woman that can anticipate his needs rather than deal with one with a mind of her own. It's also possible this corpse bride has her own free will and Sally's freedom comes at the expense of another woman's freedom. Also, Sally finally gets the attention of Jack. While he might be oblivious to all that had just occurred, we are left with a glimmer of hope that maybe Jack can learn to be just a bit more open-minded in the future. Through her journey, Sally has been gaslighted, imprisoned, deprived of bodily autonomy, dismissed, ignored, manhandled, captured, physically harmed, threatened, lusted after, and forgotten, but no one even noticed. She has seen that taking on the establishment by yourself is very hard, because it's an institution that everyone is a part of. Even men like Jack, who have the best intentions, can have the worst judgment and will enforce the status quo by default, assuming it's the right thing to do. It could be a thankless crusade, and the victories are generally few and small, but when the alternative is spending your whole life living by their rules, what else can a person do but continue to fight to change the world? Normally, a 1990s film with this bleak an outlook on the female lead would warrant criticism for being tone-deaf or a product of its time. And admittedly, there are certainly things to be critical of, but in the context of Sally and how she's treated by society, this film seems to have a clear purpose. Many films of this kind depict the girl character as inconsequential to the plot, or just a mere love interest while the boys go out and have the real adventure. Yet, Nightmare engages with this trope with a more critical eye. Sally is given a storyline that more echoes Cassandra of ancient Greek mythology, a woman blessed with prophetic knowledge but cursed so that no one would believe her. Perhaps paradoxically, the fact that Sally barely affects the main plot is the whole point of the character. It's a critique of how women are depicted in film, as well as an allegory for how they're often treated within society. Like Rosemary's Baby or The Stepford Wives before it, The Nightmare Before Christmas doesn't so much give us an empowered female character, but instead reveals to us the consequences of not empowering women. When you look back at all the data points we discussed today, The Nightmare Before Christmas may very well be a criticism of that old social system in which the roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of wealth are all predominantly held by men.
The patriarchy.
That's right. We've been dancing around it for a while, but now with all this talk about systemic gender inequality, trolls be damned, we're gonna have to use the dreaded F word. Okay, here we go. The Nightmare Before Christmas might be a fucking great feminist movie. I'm sorry to use the F word like that, I'm just really passionate about feminism. But you don't have to take my word for it. Let's take a look back at the film's screenwriter, Caroline Thompson. Before writing such films as Edward Scissorhands, The Addams Family, and Corpse Bride, Thompson wrote a little-known book called Firstborn back in 1983. It's here we see a precedent for her feminist themes. The novel's main focus is based around important social topics and reproductive matters that are still relevant today. It's a story of a woman who undergoes an abortion but then finds out years later that her fetus survived the termination, and what's left of it has tracked her down looking for its mother. The protagonist faces multiple women's issues throughout the story, such as sexual objectification, infantilization by the men in her life, motherhood, pregnancy, and of course terminating said pregnancy. While the book never takes a hard stance on either side of the abortion debate, the afterword included in the book makes fairly clear Thompson's feelings on the matter.
I was in high school when Roe v. Wade passed, and for us it was a big reason to rejoice. Our bodies are our bodies, period. It is our business, period.
After reading this controversial book, Tim Burton wanted to work with Caroline Thompson, and it wasn't long before she dreamed up the screenplay for Edward Scissorhands, based on a drawing Tim Burton made in high school.
Firstborn isn't exactly a dress rehearsal for Edward Scissorhands, but in many ways it is. Both are versions of the Frankenstein story.
And the success of their collaboration on the project led them to work together for yet another Frankenstein-inspired character. The Nightmare Before Christmas had a rocky start. The screenplay, based on a poem Tim Burton wrote, failed to be completed in time for production after then screenwriter Michael McDowell had fallen ill. It was then that Caroline Thompson was called in to write the script and save the project. While Burton gave Thompson a lot of freedom to do what she wanted with the script, many of the major story beats were mapped out for her, and in some cases, even filmed due to Danny Elfman's musical numbers having already been put into production. Though that was basically it, a collection of songs she had to fit together into a cohesive storyline. With the major beats set in stone, one of the only elements of the story that hadn't been touched yet was Tim Burton's character of Sally. Burton's initial vision of the character was a bit more voluptuous than the design we know today, but once Thompson began writing the script, she made the character her own.
I was like, well, I don't understand that kind of girl. I kind of get the little matchstick style girl, so we redesigned her.
Thompson's original screenplay gives more screen time to Sally, but it's also somewhat grimmer. A lot more is made of the abusive relationship she's stuck in. And in this version, Sally's personality is much more shaped by the degradation she's experienced her whole life. For example, in the script, Sally sleeps through the town meeting because Dr. Finkelstein is able to guilt her into eating the poisoned soup that she prepared for him. While Sally still strives for freedom, she feels much more beaten down, often blaming herself for things that are clearly Finkelstein's fault. This sentiment is best summarized in her letter to Dr. Finkelstein during one of her escape attempts.
Dear Doctor, please don't come after me again. Please let me go this time. I'm all grown up and I need to find my own life now. I hope you will understand, someday at least. Signed, Sally. P.S. I'll come visit very soon. P.P.S. There's fresh soup in the fridge. P.P.P.S. It isn't spiked.
Anyway, after a few more drafts and a Danny Elfman song, The Nightmare Before Christmas became the film we know today. And while we certainly can't judge a film based on the first draft of the script, it does give us interesting insight as to what was initially conceived by Caroline Thompson and the themes that were present when writing this story. So there are some feminist themes, but is The Nightmare Before Christmas actually a feminist film? Well, it may not actually be that simple. Is merely depicting a woman's perspective really enough to label a film as feminist? Or is Sally's unceasing devotion to her male hero protagonist enough to disqualify it from this classification? Perhaps most importantly, does the film carry clear enough a message to inspire awareness of a real issue, or does it just further normalize bad behaviors by being too subtle? There are likely some good points to be had on both sides, so let's see a nice friendly debate in the comments. And while your words do help me appease the fickle elder gods of the YouTube algorithm, I'm actually curious to see where people stand on this. Maybe write a comment down there. Also, if you just can't get enough Christmas movie analysis or Catherine O'Hara, we'll be tackling the true meaning of Home Alone on the next episode of Storyograph, and it might be tangentially related to vampire mythology. I'm not making any promises here, but you might want to check it out just to be sure.